is a quick lab on Lambda functions. In previous lecture, we discussed key concepts about Lambda function. In this lab, I want to show you how easy it is to get started with AWS Lambda function. I have logged into my AWS account and currently I am in Sydney region. But in case if you like to create Lambda functions in any other regions, then make sure you select that particular region. To go to AWS Lambda console, go to services, and here you can search for Lambda. Before we create Lambda function, let me show you something. If you click on this dashboard, this will show a lot of details about your complete account. Say for example, currently I have no Lambda functions created, that's why the count is 0. And you can see how much storage your code is using. So if you see, my account has a maximum concurrency of 1000, which means at any given point of time, I cannot have more than 1000 concurrent Lambda functions running. So any application I deploy in my AWS account should use Lambda concurrency less than 1000. If I'm going above this limit, then I will be getting throttle errors. And if you observe here, unreserved concurrency is also 1000 because I have no Lambda functions running in my account and I have not reserved any concurrency for any Lambda functions. So all the 1000 Lambda concurrency which I have are available for use. That's why it says unreserved concurrency is also 1000. And this dashboard tells you how your Lambda functions are performing. So this dashboard is for all the Lambda functions running your AWS account. You can see how many error counts you're getting, what is the success rate, and you can also see what are the throttle rates that you're getting, and you can see what are the number of invocations, and you can see concurrent invocations, durations, unreserved concurrency. So basically what you need to remember is all these metrics are for all the Lambda functions deployed in your AWS account. These metrics are not for any particular Lambda function. These are account level metrics. So let me quickly show you how to create a Lambda function. Let me click on this functions. And if you look at my dashboard, currently there are no Lambda functions. So to create a new Lambda function, you need to click on this create function button. For this demo, I will choose author from scratch option. Let me give a name, something like Lambda demo -1. And if you look at this, AWS Lambda functions can be created in many languages. So currently we have support for .NET, Go, Java language, Node.js, Python, Ruby. Yeah, that's it. So these are the languages which Lambda currently supports. So for this demo, let me choose Node.js. If you click on this choose or create an execution role, I will choose this option, create a new role with basic Lambda permissions. And then just click on create function. Lambda will take a minute to create your Lambda functions. My Lambda function has been created successfully. So Lambda has created a default code for us, but there is also an option to upload your code. Let me show you that. If you click on this actions drop down button, you have two options here. Either you can choose to upload a zip file or you can choose option to upload a file from Amazon S3. For this demo, I'm not uploading any zip file. I will just try to give a demo with the default code, whatever we have here. Currently we have a Lambda function, but no one can access this Lambda function. So in order to expose this API to external world, what we need to do is we need to add a trigger. So there are multiple trigger options for Lambda. If you click on add trigger button, you will see all the available triggers for Lambda. We can add API gateway as a trigger, or we can either use AWS IoT as a trigger. We can use CloudWatch as a trigger, code commit. You have option to choose DynamoDB as a trigger. You can even add Kinesis as a trigger point. So if you choose this option, then Lambda will act like a consumer for Kinesis, and it will read all the events which are landing on Kinesis. You can add, there are multiple options. There are a lot of options, a lot of triggers that you can set for Lambda, like SNS, SQS. Yeah, there are plenty of them, but for this demo, I will just choose this API gateway. I will create a new API for this demo. And I will say REST API. Security type, I don't want any securities. So I will choose open. Yeah, that's it. I'm leaving everything else as default. Let me click on add. Okay, so we have successfully added API gateway as trigger for our Lambda function. We need to do some configurations for this API gateway before people can access our Lambda functions using this API gateway. So let me click on this API gateway. Currently, any method is allowed on this Lambda function. I don't want that. So let me delete this any method. Go to actions, click on delete method and just say delete. So my Lambda function doesn't have any methods now. I just want to add a get method for my Lambda function. So let me click on actions, create method, and under the drop down, I will select get method. I will choose integration type as Lambda function, and I will also use Lambda proxy integration. And I want the Lambda to be deployed in AP Southeast 2, so I'm not changing that. Here you can select which Lambda function you want the request to be routed. So let me select Lambda demo 1 and let me save it. Okay, we have just created a get method, but we have not yet deployed this API, so people will not be able to access this yet. So let me go ahead and deploy this API. Go to actions, go to deploy API, and I will choose default stage and description demo 1 and click on deploy. Yeah, so now the API is deployed and people will be able to access our API now. Let me click on this. Let me click on this get method. This is the invoke URL for our get API. You see this? We got the default response which was configured in our Lambda function. So that's it. Getting started with Lambda is very simple and doesn't take much time. So let me summarize what we have done. So we have created a Lambda function. We have added API gateway as a trigger for our Lambda function, and we created a get method for our Lambda function. Okay, let me go back to Lambda functions dashboard. I want to show you a few things here. Click on this Lambda function, and if you scroll down, so you see this concurrency configuration here. This is where we do the AWS Lambda concurrency configurations. So you can either use unreserved concurrency. If you select this option, what will happen is Lambda will not reserve any concurrency, but your Lambda function can access all the unreserved account concurrency which is available. So sometimes it is good and sometimes it is bad, because if you don't select any reserved concurrency for your Lambda function, then it can scale up unexpectedly and it might cause issues for your downstream systems. So if you choose to set a concurrency for your Lambda function, you can choose this option and you can give some number here. So if you say reserved concurrency as 10, which means only 10 concurrent Lambda functions can start, not more than that. So this might be required sometimes to protect your downstream systems. And if you observe one thing here, the unreserved account concurrency has become 990. Because if we reserve some concurrency for particular Lambda function, what will happen is this concurrency will be reserved only for this Lambda function, and other Lambda functions in your account will not be able to use this concurrency. That's why earlier we had 1000 as unreserved concurrency. Now we are reserving 10 for this Lambda, so we are still left with 990. And if you wish to choose provision concurrency for your Lambda function, you can configure that here. If you wish to add provision concurrency for your Lambda function, then you need to click add configuration here. And then you can mention how many provision concurrency you want to use. We have reserved only 10 Lambda concurrency for this Lambda function. That's why it's showing as 10. So let me choose 10 here. And then if you click on save, then your Lambda function will have 10 provision concurrency. So provision concurrency means your Lambda functions will not be recycled and your Lambda functions will always be running. So it might be helpful, especially where you want millisecond latencies, or you're using Lambda as a REST API, ideally we can't afford to have high cold start times. So in such cases we can go for provision concurrency, and of course provision concurrency will have additional cost. So if you really need this provision concurrency, then you can go for it. Otherwise you can just go for the normal reserved concurrency or unreserved concurrency. So for this demo, I don't want to save it, so I'll just cancel it. Okay, now let me show you Lambda monitoring metrics. If you go to this monitoring tab, you see this, we had made one invocation on our Lambda function. That's why the count is showing as 1 here. And if you see the duration is around 11 milliseconds. It's pretty quick because there is no much code here. It's just a default code that we used. And if you look at the error dashboard, we don't have any errors. We have only one success transaction here, and there are no throttles. And you can see the iterator age comes into picture only when Lambda is listening for kinesis streams. And you can see your concurrent execution count here. So yeah, these are the basic metrics that Lambda provides, but these are good enough to make a decision whether the Lambda function is performing good or bad. Yeah, that's all for this lecture. I just wanted to show you how quick it is to get started with Lambda function, and also I wanted to show you how to configure reserved concurrency and how to use unreserved concurrency, and I wanted to show you provision concurrency, and also I wanted to show you these basic monitoring metrics that come with this Lambda function. That's all for this